I'm going to talk about the Gironde, really in terms of the estuary itself. So this isn't about wine, but it's about the importance of the Gironde estuary, which has had an enormous impact upon wine, both geologically as well as commercially. And so what we're looking here is from roughly around Bordeaux. We see where the Dordogne meets the Gironde at the Bec d'Am, which then forms the estuary. And the estuary then goes up, and there's a bunch of islands, which is called the archipelago. You have Blaye up here, you have Bourg over here, you have Margaux over here, and it flows out to the Atlantic Ocean. It's really neither a river nor an ocean, but there's an intense interplay in the Gironde between those two. And it's absolutely fundamental in terms of creating what Bordeaux became and is. First, just a little bit of terminology so that we don't get confused. So I'm going to talk about the left bank and the right bank. And the right bank has got nothing to do with Saint-Émilion. What we term the right bank is really the Libournais area in Bordeaux, a more traditional description of that. So the left bank of the estuary of the Gironde is the Médoc, and the right bank is the Blaye-Bourget area, which also then continues all the way up to Royan, up by the sea. And of course, it continues up here to Soulac-sur-Mer and Verdun on the left bank. So left bank and right bank is just around the Gironde. Nothing to do with Pomerol or any of those places. So I needed to get that straight. The rivers of France, again, you know, the Dordogne drains from the Massif Central down into, meeting at the Gironde, and the Garonne comes from the Pyrenees flowing through Toulouse and down there. This becomes very important to the historical commercial development of the area. Before the Ice Age, the Aquitaine area was all underwater. And because, we talk about global warming now, it's not getting nearly as hot as what it used to be. And then we went into the Ice Age period, and as all the glaciers and the icebergs and all of that formed in Greenland, the water receded and it left the limestone, which is today, of course, very important to the viticulture. The Garonne brought gravel down from the Pyrenees. We've all heard this before. The Dordogne brought sand and clay from the Massif Central. And then when the Ice Age ended, the ocean rose again, which slowed the flow of the rivers. And it backed up, and which created all those gravel deposits in the Grave and in the Médoc, and the clay and those types of things in the Libournais area, if you will. So at this time, at the end of the Ice Age, much of the Médoc was still islands or little islets, and we're talking about several meters of rise in sea level, which created all of this. And at the same time, today, well, through this period, the ocean brings both salt and sand into the estuary as well. So there's these countervailing forces which are going on. In the right bank, you have very, very high bluffs in the kind of the Bourg, Blaye area, and then it got very, very marshy all the way through Saint-Cyr, and then the elevation picked up again here up into the Royan area, and this becomes significant in terms of the development. One of the things which is important is that the right bank was traditionally much better suited to ports because of the topography than was the left bank, which was mostly marshland and little islets at the time. That comes up later on in the story. So tides. The tides really govern navigation on the estuary, as well as the rivers. And we'll see that in a moment. But the sand and the silt and the sludge, which comes in through the tides, has led to, over the last 1,000 years, islands which have emerged, islands which have merged, and islands which have just completely disappeared in the estuary. The Bec d'Am has grown. Bourg used to be on the estuary. Today it's on the Dordogne. And that's again because of all the stuff that was flowing in with the tides in the estuary. The impact of the tides is felt 70 kilometers upriver. And now it's 75 kilometers to get to the ocean. So we're talking an impact of 145 kilometers that the tides are felt all the way up the estuary and then the rivers which feed it. So the impact is felt as high as Castillon-la-Bataille on the Dordogne and Cassoy on the Garonne, which is somewhere around Cadillac, a little bit, maybe a little bit upriver. The human habitation, it goes back a very long way, prehistoric. There's the Père Non-Père, which a number of us had the pleasure of visiting, which is caves which were inhabited as much as 40,000 years ago, and they left engravings in there. In the Celtic era, you had certain people come in and found what is now Bordeaux. The Médoc actually comes from the name of a tribe called the Médules, who moved up into that area. And the Santon went to the right bank, which is the Santonnage, which they call in Bordeaux today. The Roman conquest, which Chuck just talked about a little bit, the major administrative center for the Romans was not Bordeaux, it was Saintes. Bordeaux was also important, and Blaye was a garrison town and an important transit point, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But for the 1,500 years from around this time, the right bank was more important than the left bank. You had ports there. You did cabotage trade, along the littorals there. It was the crossing to Bordeaux, and the Médoc was just largely a marsh. So the Roman roads in Gaul. So this is the modern-day Saintes. This is modern-day Bordeaux. You have the basic major connections to the key parts, which are closer to Italy. And what becomes interesting is this piece here. And so yes, there is a road that comes from Saintes and then over to Blaye, and then you could come down to the Dordogne and then cross the Dordogne and then go overland and then cross over to Bordeaux. But the reality was it was the easiest way to do it was you came down to Blaye, you got on a boat, and you went to Bordeaux. And that is the main way of transportation here until Napoleon. Trade. This was an area of trade going back to the Bronze Age. And so again, with this cabotage along the coasts of not ocean sailing, they were bringing copper from Spain up into the Gironde. They were bringing tin from England, and then because they created with all of the marshes, you could do salt ponds. Salt, which salary, Romans paid their soldiers in salt, all of that. Salt was a very important local product, which was then traded out. It's an interesting thing that I learned, which I never knew, because we all talk about them growing wine in Bordeaux. They actually imported the wine, and we'll see some of the trade routes, but they basically brought it up to Toulouse and then onto the Garonne and then brought it up into Bordeaux. And somebody got the bright idea to put a big tax on it, and so people decided it would be cheaper, let's just plant vines. And that's the actual origin of wine growing in Bordeaux. So there was over the years, a lot of turbulence in Aquitaine, which is that general region. As the Roman Empire collapsed from the 5th century to the 10th, the Gironde was basically an invasion route. And so you had everybody from the Saxons to the Muslims to the Vikings that were coming to raid all of those rich Gallo-Roman villas. And what was a couple of things, that are important there. One is, the wine trade developed with that. You had seasonal fleets which would come from England to buy claret at, certain 2 or 3 times a year. And it also created a sense of being pro-English in Bordeaux, not only because it had been, ruled or part of the British Crown, but also because of the commercial connection. I'll come back to that in a minute. During the Wars of the Religion, right bank leaned Protestant, left bank leaned Catholic, and Bordeaux supported the Fronde against Louis XIV. And the French people here know what that is, and I'm not going to bother to explain it other than it was kind of a revolt of the parliaments against the king, which was a pretty big event in French history. The consequence is that there was always a tension between Bordeaux and the king and the monarchy. Due to certain English affinity, the kings put on a salt tax, which was pretty punitive to the producers there. You had the Wars of Religion. You had the echoes out from the Fronde. And so in terms of the development, what interests most of us who like the Médoc wines is Henry IV, Louis XIII, Louis XIV, they all encouraged draining the marshes. And Henry IV started it by bringing in the Dutch to bring their technology to do that. But until the 18th century, the right bank wines had a better reputation than the left bank wines. So as the Bourg had a better reputation than did the Médoc. And there's a quote from the end of the 1700s from an Abbé Borin who wrote a history. He said, "The wines of Bourg were so prized in the last century," meaning the 17th, that those who had with property in both the Bourget and the Médoc would only sell their Bourg wines on condition that the buyer would also take Médoc stuff. How the world has changed. But it relates to the geography. But as the land was drained, and you have all those nice gravel deposits laffittes. You have in the first half of the 18th century, you had what the French call the fureur des plantes, which they just started planting everywhere in the Médoc, and it was so much so that they feared overproduction. The king tried to stop it, but the important thing, and Chuck alluded to this as well, the Médoc became a monoculture. It was just vineyards, whereas the right bank stayed in polyculture. So there was a much more diversified agricultural production and tradition on the right bank as well as smaller properties. So they became very, very different. The right bank tended to be much more seafaring. It's said that people from Médoc never went to sea. They just stayed and took care of the grapes. And in the 19th century, they built a canal along the Garonne. And so you can see what the importance of having water routes that goes through here. One of the objectives is to get around Gibraltar because of those perfidious Albion people, but also in terms of facilitating the trade that went on. So that basic water route has been used since Roman times. Bly was the main transit point via water, as I said before, between the north, coming down particularly from Saintes, which was a major center, and you'd catch the boat at Bly and then go to Bordeaux. And so consequently, the Romans garrisoned it. It was a very, very key transit point. In the Middle Ages, the Rudel family were the medieval lords there. And they built a castle, part of which is still right here within the interior of the fortress. Now, there's a back and forth struggle between the French and the English over Bly, over the centuries of the 100 Years' War. One would control it and the other would raid it, and vice versa. When it settled under the crown, Louis XIV had Vauban complete a citadel at Bly and a fort on this island here was called Pate, and then across there's a fort called Fort Bedoc, which is near Cantenac. And the artillery at the era couldn't reach all the way across, so you put a fort in the middle and a fort on either side, but the main bastion was really in Bly, and it is quite an impressive set of works. It had two functions. One was to protect Bordeaux from invasion. The second was to control Bordeaux, because they didn't. Louis XIV did not trust the Bordelais politically, and they had had many occasions of calling on the English for assistance. And so, as I said, that remained the main crossing to Bordeaux until Napoleon bridged the Garonne. Started out with a pontoon bridge in, I don't know, 1810 or something like that. He needed to move troops to Spain very, very quickly, where he was getting his rear end kicked by Wellington. And so they needed to get the troops down there faster, and it was easier if they just crossed and kept going. And they put in a permanent bridge, finally completed construction about 1822. So at that point, Bly really lost a tremendous amount of its importance and really became pretty much of a secondary place. And because I stole most of this, this is one of the principal sources. Probably about 75% of the information here came from that. So it's now time for La Mission Aubryon, which I think is an extraordinary reward for having sat through the last 15 minutes.